Welcome to the Quality Meat Scotland podcast. Industry updates and best practice to promote, support, develop and protect the Scottish red meat sector.
Hello and thank you very much for downloading this QMS podcast. I'm Mark Stephen. This edition is aimed primarily at pig farmers, and we're going to be discussing AMR, antimicrobial resistance, something that can and has developed in the past through the excessive use of antibiotics in pig rearing. It's potentially very serious, and it's got implications not just for the animals, but arguably for us as a species too. Joining me now are Grace Webster, who's a specialist pig vet with more than 30 years' experience working in the industry. Grace is currently the chair of the Scottish Pig Health and Welfare Group, but also chairs their subcommittee on antibiotic use, which aims to produce recommended targets by this autumn. Lysan Eppink is a veterinary advisor, a farm vet who lectures at the University of Edinburgh Vet School in pig health and management. So I'll start with you, Lysan. What is AMR?
AMR stands for antimicrobial resistance. Anti means anti, against. Micro is tiny and bios means life. So antimicrobial means anything against something tiny that we can't see. So that could be bacteria, that could be viruses, that could be fungal infections. Parasites are included in this as well. So basically the resistance means that they're not susceptible to antibiotics that we are using in this case. Antibiotics are referred to as antibacterial components like penicillins, that they are not susceptible to them. So it doesn't kill or inhibit their growth anymore.
How widespread is AMR?
That's a very good question. It depends on whether you're talking globally, within the humans, within the animals, but it is generally globally something that really worries us. In the human side, there's a lot of resistance, for example, for TB, gonorrhea, Clostridium difficile. Everybody knows the MRSA, the methicillin resistant Staph aureus. And we do have similar issues in animals, though we still seem to, for most cases, be able to deal with it. But there are, for example, some Brachyspira or dysentery strains that are multi-resistant, and the only solution we've got left is to cull out the whole herd. So yes, I would say it is a big issue, but we are still there early enough, I think, to turn round.
Bear in mind, I'm not a pig farmer, I'm not a vet, so this might be an obvious question to you. How easy is it to spot AMR?
It's not easy. So there's different scenarios. So on a farm, when you would maybe suspect antimicrobial resistance is when you've got your animals and you treat them and there's no response to treatments. Now that could be due to a whole load of things. Maybe it's the wrong antibiotic for that particular bacteria. Maybe it's a viral infection, in which case antibiotics don't do anything. It could be that in glass, it might be the right antibiotics, but that in the animal itself there is substances there, maybe scar tissue or what have you, that prohibits the antibiotic actually doing its job. So it's difficult to spot, but if you've got any issues, obviously what you need to do is get your vet in and they can take samples and they can do some testing. Though some proper antibiotic resistant testing does take a little bit of time to work up that genetic material and see what's going on.
Grace Webster, how are antibiotics currently used in the pig industry?
Antibiotics are used to treat, as Lysan has already said, bacterial infections in pigs. And it can be given to an individual by injection, they can be given in water, or our main form is actually group medication in feed. And that's largely because we tend to keep our pigs in fairly large groups. And when we have an infection, a pathogen that's present in a group, now that may be that they share the same airspace, or it may be that they share the same drainage lines, so they can have access to urine and feces from other pigs, which may contain that pathogen. So when we have perhaps a small number affected, and it gets to the extent where treating them individually is impractical, then we will treat them as a group, and the whole group will be treated to prevent or to reduce incubation of those infections.
How big an armoury have you got? How many different types of antibiotics would you have to play with if there was an outbreak of anything?
currently we do have a good range of antibiotics that we can use. And actually, this is something that we should guard jealously. And this is one of the reasons that we are looking to reduce our usage. We know that antimicrobial resistance will develop more the more that we use antibiotics. So in reducing that use, we're slowing that process. So we're trying to use as little as possible so that we look after that group. We don't have the same number of antibiotics that they would have available in the human sector, but we do still have a good armory, if you like, that we can turn to when we need them.
Lysan, if microorganisms become resistant to antibiotics in pigs, why is that bad news for humans?
It's bad news for humans because pigs in theory, can pass on bacteria to humans and vice versa. And that's not just pigs. Chickens will do the same, dogs will do the same, cats will do the same. So if we've got antimicrobial resistance in our pigs and we are getting in touch with those live bacteria, which shouldn't happen when you cook your food properly or anything along those lines, we could ingest those bacteria and they would be part then of potentially of our microbiome, which could then bacteria are very, very good at passing on genetic material to each other. So potentially we could create problems if we don't do our food hygiene properly or our personal hygiene properly. So from pigs, I've not heard of pigs passing it on permanently to humans. We know that's happened in chickens, where chickens passed it, humans passed it to chickens, and then chickens passed it back. But I have heard it from other species like dogs and cats, where clearly people have got a bit more closer contact to the animals than you would have with pigs.
Generally speaking, the majority of our public don't have direct contact with farm animals, but they will have direct contact with cats and dogs and their pets. But clearly there is a percentage of our population that does work closely with farm species, and it's important that they are not picking up these bacteria and then taking it out and spreading it into the wider population.
How is antibiotic use, Grace, recorded and monitored within the industry at the moment?
Well, we have developed an electronic medicines book, and this is a fantastic tool that we have in the pig sector, and it's hoped that this will actually be extended to other species. And what we do with that is that we collect anonymised data from all our pig farms in the UK, certainly all our quality assured pig farms, about the antibiotics that they use. So the data is aggregated for use by the industry and by stakeholders such as the Veterinary Medicines Directorate, and it can help with decision making and with policy formulation. It's been really helpful to industry in identifying the types of units that perhaps use the most antibiotic. We can identify geographical hotspots. We can monitor. We're seeing that there has been a change from giving antibiotics in feed to a much more targeted use through water medication and so on. So through quality assurance, it's mandatory for all producers to submit their antibiotic usage every quarter. And that would be all use. I mean, it would be all the injections that they've given, all the in-feed and all the water-soluble medications. And that's calculated against the number of pigs sold off the farm or the number of sows and boars on the farm, so that we have this figure, which is called the milligrams per kilogram usage per population correction unit. So there's also a benchmarking facility associated with this electronic medicine book, and that allows producers to compare their use with others of the same category of unit. So, for example, a nursery would compare against other nurseries, whether if you were a farrow to finish, you wouldn't be wanting to compare against a nursery. And this benchmarking is further split down so that we can see our usage against what we might describe as the more standard antibiotics that we use, and those that are described as critically important antibiotics. And that's due to their importance to human medicine, as they are antibiotics of last resort. And this obviously lets the producers know how well they're doing, because you tend not to know if you're in isolation, just how you're performing against other farms. And this obviously allows them to see that.
The use of antibiotics has a cost. So farmers aren't going to be using them for fun. They have to rear, or they are currently rearing pigs in a certain way. So how is it possible to reduce their use if the circumstances don't change?
I think in the past, it would be fair to say that antibiotics have been cheaper than perhaps other routes. So disease expression, so when you actually see a clinical disease on a farm, it may have been bubbling away under the surface for some time, and it has tipped over into being clinical disease because of some environmental factor, perhaps. So that might be in the winter when ventilation rates are not as high, air quality tends not to be so good. So respiratory disease might appear. So yes, in comparison with perhaps changing buildings or reducing stocking rates or a number of other management tools that we might use, antibiotics were quite cheap. Now, it is a conscious and it is an active decision to reduce those antibiotic usage. So in order to do that, producers either have to improve the health situation on their farm, which is something that you would do with the veterinary surgeon for the farm, obviously, or they may change the management in some other way. And there's all sorts of things that we would do to improve the management. The example that I gave of respiratory disease may be associated with increasing the number of fans in a room. Maybe it will be associated with providing supplementary heating to keep the temperature up so that fans are coming on more often, and so on.
Lysan, presumably, just from what Grace was saying there, prevention is much better than cure.
Absolutely. We will still be very much fighting for, obviously, the right to treatment is required. As Grace said, if these animals are sick, we need to treat them, and we'll treat them as much as necessary with as little as possible, and do whatever you can to avoid the need in the future. So prevention there obviously is the way forward. It's not always that simple, because when you see coughing pigs, you might have to go back a little bit further in time to see what went wrong. And you have to take the right samples to make sure that you know what bug you're dealing with, so you can treat it with the right antibiotics if it is a bacteria, and you can then look for maybe the right vaccine to treat it if it's required, alongside with improving the environment, as Grace already said.
You mentioned earlier the fact that this is antimicrobial resistance, and microbial critters are tiny, things like viruses, bacteria, parasites, etc. So presumably antimicrobial resistance is not just limited to the use of antibiotics.
Absolutely not, no. So what we've seen, for example, in the ruminants industry, so cattle and sheep, is that we see a lot of resistance for antiparasitic drugs. So it is a bigger problem than just in bacteria, but they are less in the pig industry. They seem to be less of an issue, but definitely wormers so antiparasitics are definitely something where we see similar issues.
Grace, presumably you have to get a handle on this, just from what you said about the critical antibiotics, the ones that are really, really essential for human health. We can't afford to develop an antimicrobial resistance in anything to those critical drugs. Has there ever been a suggestion that if you don't get a handle on this, then it might be withdrawn from veterinary use?
Back in 2015, when we were really just starting to address these issues, there was a suggestion that the industry should, as a voluntary move, undertake to not use these critically important antibiotics. Now, the reality was that the pig sector, and I am only talking about the pig sector here, used very little of these critically important antibiotics. We only use them as individual treatments generally. And we have taken the position in the pig industry, I should say, that we feel that we need access to these. There is the potential that we could have a situation where a bacteria was in fact resistant to all of our standard antibiotics, and that we had to use them for the welfare of those animals. It is a welfare issue if an animal has an infection that can't be treated. So we want to retain access to them, but we want to be able to demonstrate that we can do that responsibly. And we absolutely have done that. Our use of critically important antibiotics is less than 1 milligram. By 2019, we were down to 0.03 milligrams per kilogram of any of these critically important antibiotics. And colistin, which was one of great concern to the medical profession at the time, it is even lower than that. It's negligible, the amounts that we're using. So I think the pig sector has shown very clearly that we can respond to that responsibly and that we will only use it when we absolutely have to.
Forgive my ignorance, what is colistin?
It's a drug that we have used in the pig sector for probably nearly 40 years, and we have absolutely no resistance to colistin in the UK. So we've always used it fairly cautiously. Now, it was not a drug that was commonly used in the human sector because it can be toxic to people's kidneys. But now the situation in the human sector is that they have lost so many antibiotics that this is still being used as a last resort antibiotic now, where infections can't be controlled by other substances.
Progress has obviously been made in reducing the use of antibiotics, Grace, but how much is there still to do?
Well, we have come a long, long way, actually. As I said, it was 2015 when we really started to address this seriously. And at that point, the pig sector was using 278 milligrams per kilogram of antibiotic. Now, to put that into context, the UK agriculture as a whole at that time was using 63 milligrams per kilogram. So quite rightly, the pig sector was very firmly on the naughty step with regards to our usage. But we have made considerable progress. And by the end of 2019, our usage was down to 110 milligrams per kilogram. So that's a reduction of 60% in 4 years. And I think that's something that the industry should be extremely proud of. Clearly, 110 is not where we want to be. We still have some way to go. And there are one or two of our EU colleagues, pig colleagues, that are using about a third of that amount. Now, we will never get down to using no antibiotic. If we do that, we are probably compromising pig welfare. And it should not be considered that all antibiotic use is bad use. You know, we should be looking, as Lysan's already suggested, we should be looking to replace and to reduce and to refine our usage. So we're absolutely using as little as possible, but as much as necessary.
Just judging from what you're saying, Grace, there needs to be, there's an absolute requirement for an active dialogue between the vets and the farmers.
Yes, I mean, you won't be surprised to hear me say that this is absolutely crucial, you know, the vet-client relationship. And really you should be making, you know, the maximum possible use of your vet's training and experience, you know, and follow their advice. And remember that this is partnership working. You should be working together to protect the antibiotics that we have for animals, you know, and it is not just for the sake of our animals, it's also for our family and our friends.
Grace, thank you very much for that. And Lysan Eppink, again, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That was veterinary advisor Lysan Eppink and Grace Webster, currently chair of the Scottish Pig Health and Welfare Group. This has been a QMS podcast. I hope you found it useful. I'm Mark Stephen. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Quality Meat Scotland podcast. For news and to listen back to previous episodes of the podcast, visit qmscotland.co.uk. For Scotch beef, Scotch lamb and specially selected pork recipe videos and inspiration, visit www.scotchkitchen.com or follow Scotch Kitchen on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter.